Hello, Sublation Media viewers. It's me again, Douglas Lane, and you're about to watch an interview with Susanna Kleeman, whose podcast and video series Fatal Dates is coming up on November 1st. But I also wanted to tell you about something that's coming up on November 5th, which is a seminar I'll be doing with CGAS, the Global Center for Advanced Studies. It's called Can You Be a Radical Content Producer? YouTube, podcasting, and the left. The seminar will cover the ideas of Theodore Adorno on the culture industry. It will take a look at the ideas of Noam Chomsky and manufacturing consent. And it will also provide you with a strategy for how to become a content producer, an influencer, and a micro-niche internet celebrity like me. In all seriousness, it will take a look at the limits of the digital space, some of the possibilities that are still available to us, and most of all, it will ask the question, is there such a thing as an alternative media and a left media in today's diffuse, segmented, atomized digital landscape? Just what has been done and undone in our culture and in our politics. And that's what we'll be covering in this GCAS seminar. You can sign up. It's 180 euros, which is actually roughly equivalent to $180 to be included in the seminar. It will be running throughout November. First one is November 5th. I've been remiss in announcing this earlier. I should have gotten to it a while ago. So please do go sign up, and you can take a course with me on radical podcasting.
The death of God is about the drying up of a horizon of meaning and of a whole form of human life.
Where do we stand in the illusion it makes? What kind of space are we invited into?
The material relations between people become social relations between things. When we look at toasters, corn, and TVs,
we still, to a large extent, live in the interregnum between worlds, if you will, or between paradigms. Not many people in the history of the world have faced that.
Diet Soap is a Sublation Media podcast.
Becomes a kind of symbolic world where what's inside your head and used to be your private thoughts has become made real by the beautiful images and products of companies like that. And you can get lost in that. And that can be more important than anything else. And doesn't that make it a different sort of, it's not just, it's not just what you were saying. There's also the dream aspect of symbols. The fact it's very deep, and the fact that it can lull us almost like a drug, and we can spend all our time there. And, obviously he suggests that's what we've done.
Let's back up. Let's back up and start from the beginning for us for this conversation and say.
Well, because that was a bit that was just a bit too pointed, and you didn't really have a good comeback to that.
No. I could just to because I don't want to dive into deep theoretical argumentation right at the start. I want to say, hi, Susanna Kleeman. Welcome to the Diet Soap podcast.
Thank you. So nice to be here.
I'm glad to bring you on as a co-creator with the Sublation Media Company.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are launching a podcast and video series from Sublation Media's YouTube channel, but it is wholly yours. Or what do we work it out to be?
Okay, that's fine. It's wholly mine. That's fine, Doug. That's great.
No, it's like,
thank you.
No, we worked it out. It's like something like, I think
does that circumvent? Okay, no, I'll take that. That's
no. This is not a new contract. I think it's 60-40, 60% Sublation, but no, it's not that.
No, I don't think it is 60 to you.
It's not that. No. But the point is, the intellectual property is yours. This is a project that you're running. We're working with you to do it. We're sharing in the profits and the revenue if that ever arrives, but it's a new project that we're working on together. It's not wholly Sublation's. It's yours as well.
Well,
so
thank
people
you so
should
much.
Take a look at
so my honest labor has an honest outcome. I'm not just an employee of Sublation. I have some some stake in it too, like a proper. Okay, it's good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you
just
for
want
doing
to
that.
state that on the record for all time.
Okay.
You're not an employee.
Okay.
So that, this is illegal. You know, I've got my lawyer in the other room. He's telling me to tell you you're not an employee. But okay. The reason I'm having you on today is so we can discuss just what the project is about, which is it's called Fatal Dates. So we can. I mean, this is my way of. I'm eventually going to be on your show. I think. I hope that you will swipe right on me eventually, and that I can have one of these fatal dates with you. But and this is not a. This is. I asked you out just for a cup of coffee, just to see if we get along. I mean, before we actually have any kind of fatal date, we're just going to talk.
Okay, so you get a privilege. You get a privileged access that I don't let other guests who come on my show.
Right, that's right. I'm taking.
You're sounding it out. You're sounding it out. Okay, I guess I'll let you do that. Okay.
Yeah, no, I always like to have a privileged position in my relationships. So the
we're looking forward to discussing that. All right, sorry. Yeah, please carry on.
No, so, yeah, no. And in the second half, we're going to do 2 sessions here because half for Patreon. We should talk about gender and the dating aspect of your show, like how the personal and the not really the political, but the personal and the objective, or the personal and the theoretical, are coming together in your show. But to begin with, why is it called Fatal Dates? And you can this is where you can maybe return to what we were arguing about at the beginning, which is Baudrillard. Baudrillard, how do you say his name correctly?
I say Baudrillard.
Baudrillard.
And I think a French person would say it differently. A French person might say Baudrillard or something like that. But I say Baudrillard, which I feel is half English and half French. And I noticed that you sometimes you get a little bit caught up and you're doing a lot of curlicues and stuff around that name. I think you can just say Baudrillard. Or
Baudrillard.
JB.
Okay, yeah.
JB, you can say.
I made a video on Baudrillard, and I had a Frenchman contact me and correct me, and then send me sound files of him pronouncing the name correctly. And I struggled to match him. And then I met him in Paris, and he was quite a nice man. And Conrad Hamilton
it was Conrad Hamilton.
Wine with him. Oh no, it was not Conrad Hamilton. He was there as well.
Well, a good answer, which maybe you already gave to this guy, but you could give next time if someone said that to you, is that, well, that's very un-Baudrillardian of him to be such a stickler to the letter of things when things are nothing in any case. And we can all do with less policing and more just letting the meaning through, basically. So
we went to Café Flores,
really?
there. Oh, yes. It was very, very French and bourgeois. So go ahead.
Did you take photos of yourself there and there? Did they become symbolic items, cultural currency, things you could later reuse or could use one day?
We made a video.
There you go. So there you go.
We did a video.
Okay, so you were reaping the symbolic benefits that are not just to do with use value or exchange value, that are to do with something else, something more emotional. But
we didn't make a video at Café Flores because that would have sent the wrong message. Not very proletariat. Sitting around at Café Flores drinking wine. No.
So what did you do with this video? It's just for personal use?
No, it came out. It was an interview that I did in an apartment in Paris with Conrad Hamilton about gender politics. Because there's nothing that says sublation more than 2 white guys in a French apartment discussing gender politics.
Okay, well, aren't you lucky that you got me? Aren't you lucky that for once there's well, it's not always for once, but it's good to have different sorts of people also, isn't it? Sometimes, anyway. Yeah,
I suppose. I'll let you in, and you can talk about feminism too, I suppose. Anyway, so
maybe I don't want to talk about feminism. Right. Maybe I don't want to go back into that little pen. You asked me why is it called Fatal Dates? Well, handily. I've got my copy
Fatal Strategies.
Fatal Strategies.
Baudrillard.
By Jean Baudrillard. This is a great book written in the early 80s. And one of the things that's so great for me about Baudrillard is so many of the things that he wrote in the early 80s just seemed, before the internet, before Apple, they just seemed to prefigure and to entirely describe the world we're in now, but it was all sort of hypotheses. And I think that's because he's a very rigorous intellect, and he really got to the bottom of things, and he could see how things were. So his book is called Fatal Strategies, and actually it's a term, his term fatal strategies, he uses in other books, and I encountered it in other books first, but this is where he sort of purely defines it. And lots of his books are critiques of where we are, but this is actually an amazing book because it's a call to action. It tells you what you can do. It says, given that things are strange, and in his idea, things are strange because his idea about capitalism is that we have given over our capitalism to computers. They determine the price of wheat, for example. So many things are beyond our control. And we just live in an efficient system that they've devised, that we've handed over our stuff to. And part of what that efficient system is about is sating us with beautiful images, letting us live in a symbolic place. And it's not like, so I was watching your series on the Society of the Spectacle, and his difference is, he says there's no capitalistic agency. There's no people behind what's happened to us. More frighteningly, we've given our agency over to computers, and they make choices for us, and they present us with the beautiful digital worlds where we spend most of our time. And it's gone into what he calls, and he's got a lot of terms, and they're often quite irritating, but into kind of an ecstatic state where we just don't care anymore. We just like beautiful images, rather than, if we can't have what we want, we can at least see pictures of what we want. So his book, this book, Fatal Strategies, is, in that case, how do you do anything? How can you have... how can you fight back about to do with that sort of thing? And so he's very playful. And another reason I think that people sometimes have an issue with him is that he's not a strictly speaking philosopher. And he never said he was a philosopher. He said he was a metaphysician, a moralist, some other stuff. And a lot of what he says is also about, theory itself has got us into difficult places. Although at one point, at the end of this book, Fatal Strategies, he says perhaps there's only one fatal strategy, and that is theory. Because what he's a reason that I like him very much, and I'm interested in, he says there's the life that we lead, which is the life with our social, economic relationships. But there's also a life of the mind that we live inside our heads. And that life of the mind is great. And if we can access true thought in the life of the mind, we can, inside our heads, we can experience pleasure even in the most terrible and diabolical circumstances. It's possible to have a place in your head and have a life of the mind. And what he says, for example, about human relationships is it's all messed up. We can never really, especially now, there's so much images. Who are people? What do we do? What are the images we present when we sit in Cafe Flores or do anything? We've objectified ourselves. But he says, the dream still exists, that you could nevertheless connect in your mind with someone. You can meet somebody that you can see things the same way as, even if you know that the part of that is you'll never see the same things in the same way. And so he gives primacy to what goes on in your head. So some examples of fatal strategies are, he's pushing things. He said, in a world that is false, or there's a lot of falsity in it, don't try and be true, because that's the strategy that world has adopted, the appearance of truth. He says, be more false. He says, instead of, well, hold on a moment. I've got some. I was writing something. What does he say? Fight obscenity with its own weapons. Be uglier than the ugly. Be monstrous. He says, don't try and change things. Accept things, but don't really accept them. And so I would say that what he is above all is, and what these strategies are, they're playful. He's saying, don't address things head on, just come sideways. And something he says, which might be strange, is he says, you can, a function of theory is it should accept that it can be wrong. And I think that is, obviously we've talked about it before. I've received some good political education from your different channels. You have lots of interesting guests. Sometimes, though, when you talk, when people from the left talk, it seems to be, to me, just a mirror image of what everybody else says, which is there's just one reality and we need to sort it out. Whereas the thing that is good, but is also can be perceived as flippant sometimes, or not useful, or just being perverse, is to say that things are never just one way. You can always step back from them. You can always step back from them into the life of the mind. So anyway, I've been walking.
I want to respond to, first of all, I want to be a very typical kind of mansplainer and say to you, Baudrillard did not write his books before the internet. The internet was, as we understand it, the foundations for it came up in the 60s, and by 1977,
in the Second World War, if we're really going to be nitpicking, but sorry,
and by 1977, Apple Computers had been founded. So Apple Computers was around in 77. In fact, I remember in the late 70s, like 78, 79, having access to an Apple computer in my elementary school.
Okay, I stand corrected.
Usenet was around by 1980, and that's where everyday people were talking to each other through the internet. Although it wasn't until the 90s that was really being spread amongst the riffraff. It was like military bases and universities. But the main thing is, I think that Baudrillard, along with some science fiction writers and some filmmakers, and some maybe advertising executives and a whole slew of other people, was good at giving expression to the rise of the dominance of information technology at the end of the 70s, or through the 70s and into the 80s, and that what made him so popular and interesting and the kind of writer that I, at the age of like 20, 21, 22, wanted to pick up when I went to the bookstore, was the fact that he was speaking directly to this kind of experience of life.
He's a great writer. It has to be said. He's a great writer. He's got fantastic turn of phrase, and in many ways, it's almost like reading fiction. He's got a great style. It's very seductive and persuasive.
Right, but I mean, I had been a child during this moment when the personal computer came on the scene, and amongst a certain class anyway, started to just be pretty pervasive. Like all my friends had little computers in their homes, like the Timex Sinclair 2000 piece of junk. You get a tape, an audio cassette to load up a program and play a game for 20 minutes.
Biorhythms, yes.
Yeah. So he was a pioneer of, and looked into the phenomenon that was right there. It was already happening, but could see into the future, project into the future, because now we are living definitely in a hyper-real world.
Yes, and he called all that the code. And what he said, and you talk about that begins sort of in the 60s, but in parallel to it, what also happened at the same time was a real process of liberation after the Second World War. So, there's an Enlightenment project of liberation, but true liberation we associate with the 60s. And what we all think, or what we're told when we first encounter this thing that happened, is that was a great thing. We were all liberated. There was women's liberation, all sorts of liberations happen. And that's been extended into the internet, where previous stuff that was taboo, we couldn't talk about, we can talk about everything now. We live our lives openly and transparently. And something that's interesting in reading Baudrillard is he elides the code and the technical revolution with this process of liberation. And he says, in fact, it's not a real liberation, it's a fake liberation. And he says it's a liberation that's just designed so that we become better meta-tagged consumers and we can be sold to more easily. And in the end, the things that restricted it, religion, ideas about the state, ideas about class, were superseded by it's like, look, we can make more money out of people if we just let them see porn more, let them call themselves whatever they want to. Then they tell us who they are and we can sell things to them. And that, above all, it's a capitalistic liberation. And what he says, a lot of the confusion that we're in now, and especially the emotional confusion we're in now, is we're told we're liberated, but we're not really liberated. And we know that because we're not very happy. And liberation was supposed to be this ecstatic moment where we all could live as free people on planet Earth. That's just not happening. The same stuff happens. And then we feel worse in a way than we did before, because it's like, well, I'm free. I'm a free woman in the 21st century. Why do these things secretly still bug me? Whereas he says before, when it was a master-slave dialectic dynamic more, you understood your place. You understood you're not free. And that in itself is more liberating, because then you can sneak behind the bike sheds and be free there, ducking out of society. And you can also understand why you feel bad. Right. So I think there's a lot. I think so far, like, I don't disagree with Baudrillard's assessment very much at all. Like the first of all, the idea that citizens and workers were transformed into consumers, say after the Second World War, and really probably after the First World War, but more explicitly after the Second World War, and that rather than being disciplined into a production process and a political process that had an aim, right?
like for instance, the spread of democracy and commerce, which you were participating in. You now were reduced to an atom, an individual whose aim was to survive for as long as you can and for as well as you can. Good. You know, having
and also the responsibility for your happiness is given to you. If you're not happy, it's because you haven't sorted stuff out in your personal life often, or because of issues from your childhood, or the way you grew up and you were not educated enough to know how the world works. The responsibility is yours. And, you know, with that, the rise of the acceptance of psychotherapy and, you know, even online help, and this is what you should be doing. And it's on you. It's on you if you don't feel right. All the tools are there for you now. So it's on you. He also
right, and this idea that happiness itself should be a primary aim for individuals, you know, is a break from the other values. Like, you know, your goal should be to become a good citizen, a productive member of society. Your own personal happiness doesn't always come first. Your roles that you take up should be mastered, and you know that means that you should respect the people in authority who have more experience and skills and education, perhaps, and power than you do. All that's kind of questioned, and I think it's questioned in the 60s, so that for individuals and young people, especially then, could claim, no, look, what you're trying to discipline me into, what you're trying to get me to conform to is not acceptable to me as an individual, and this my internal feelings and my desires should take precedence over this.
Yes, and what he says is that before we were taught, and we all kind of knew back in you know, in history, people knew that the state is just the state is hyperreal. The state, our societies, our countries, all those things are just necessary fantasies that we all share into because it makes life a bit more easy. And we were saying, I think for many people, I don't know, it's hard to say, but I think there was not an expectation, for example, that you would find happiness in your marriage necessarily in the past. We're talking, you know, hundreds of years ago, 100 years ago. A marriage was, generally speaking, just much more of a pragmatic thing with someone in your community. And the expectation of happiness there didn't exist. The expectation is if you found happiness, it was illicitly done, or it was not in the state, the communal fantasy that we all live in. It was understood that's not the place where you're necessarily going to find happiness. And what I have learned from reading Baudrillard is that that is better than saying what we do today, which is that, look, all that's gone. All that was silly nonsense, old laws, ancient stuff, bad restrictions. But now we live in a society governed by logic, where everything's run like an Amazon logistics center, you know, in the most efficient way possible. And therefore, because it's done, and we also know that it's kind of done by machines, it's not even done by us. So therefore, it will sort it out for you. You know, if you can just plug yourself properly into the computer will read who you are, tell you what you ought to be doing, what you ought to be buying. You know, the images in my head often is some very high-tech medical sort of shower unit that you go in, it scans you, it tells you exactly what diseases you have. But that could be true of exactly what goes on your mind too. So you are saying, okay, state, you have the capacity and the tools to make me happy. Therefore, I don't have to do what I did before, which is make myself happy, or understand happiness is not a permanent state. It's just something that I can sometimes go back into, but into my own private state. And so, for example, he talks very interestingly. So I've talked here about his book, Fatal Strategies, and generally about his ideas. We haven't talked about how it relates to human relationships, to love relationships anyway. But he gives a very interesting history of how relationships used to be. So he says in the past, and here I'm talking about sort of authentic, real connection with somebody else, something that you feel a deep connection with that's often sexual. So he says in the past, you know, love is the ideas that we have about love. Those are Christian ideas. And there was something that's older than that in cultures, which is seduction, which is you're not thinking that you're going to solve all your problems by meeting somebody and falling in love with them. You're not thinking that at all. What you're thinking is in the moment, stepping out of how things are. I'm playing a fun game of flirtation with somebody. Let's see how it goes. So he says, so calls that seduction. And he says that was replaced by an idea called love, which is a quasi-Christian idea that says, no, you can, within society, in an official way, you can have a good, nice love relationship, all things can be worked out. And then he says that changes.
Look at my hair, Susan. It just goes like crazy on top. All right, go ahead.
Doing it in sympathy with my hair. Okay, so then he says something else comes. People are like, all right. So then there's something called desire, which is where more 19th century idea, you talk about, your desire for someone. Then that becomes sexual attraction, something that is kind of done post-war, the joy of sex, other books that just talk about, okay, well, let's just break it down and talk about it a bit more logically, following on the pattern of things becoming more rational. Let's divorce things from that. Let's have self-help manuals. And then he says it becomes pure porn. Then what we're in now is pure porn. And also what he says about it is, whereas before there was an idea of bouncing off someone else, the thrill being from an actual attraction with somebody else. Now it's all about what can you do for me? How can you solve my problems? I want you to, to be my friend, to have sex with me, to desire me. And it's a very egocentric thing, which is, again, about I need to be resolved. I need a relationship with someone in order to solve some stuff from me, not from I just want to have an interaction with another human being that is joyful, exciting, private, secret, that might not solve all my problems, but can just do for me now in the short term, and I can think about it later.
I think all this sex talk is something that we really need to reserve for the parrot room, because you can't just give this stuff away. Susie, you have to like, hold something back and get some donations. But I want to hear. I have to hold something back. Okay, well, that's good. I'm glad to get my dating tips from you, Doug. That's not a dating tip. Okay. Look, but here's.
But in the end, everything is a dating tip. I just want to say something else, which is true.
Okay.
And it's not just Baudrillard who says this. In fact, everything is a dating tip. And what he says about the world of seduction and human connection is, if it's actually working and playing off something, anything you do, getting a cup of tea, anything you do, a text, everything can have a double and triple meaning, and that's what's fun about it. So everything can be a dating tip if you choose to look at it that way.
Well, okay, so that seems to raise the idea that all of our social interactions right now are some form of seduction.
Well, they could be everything. And he says that's why historically people have other institutions, your family have really controlled sexuality, and not just sexuality, but your intimate connection, a strong intimate connection between two people, because it can just say he has a concept he calls reversibility, which again is something I would say is probably unpopular for Marxists. But what he says, everything isn't necessarily like that. In a moment, everything can become something else. And we've all had that experience, I'm sure. You're doing something, you're in a coffee shop, you're in a lecture, you're at work. Suddenly you see someone and your eyes just connect with them. Suddenly everything in that sphere is changed. Everything is changed. Now you're playing a game with that person, even if that's the only interaction you ever have with them. You've had a connection with them that sort of undermines the official world.
Okay, so to go back a couple of steps, you talked about how the new forms of authority in a post-war capitalist state had a focus on providing for the happiness of the individual consumer subject, and did so through a process of evaluation. You kind of use the metaphor of a computer scan that would find all of your flaws and track your desires, and maybe it was partly a medical scan, partly a psychological scan. And what comes to mind for me is the difference between the way in which machines were implemented upon people's bodies in the early part of the 20th century, in a movie like Modern Times with Charlie Chaplin. And you remember the scene where they're trying out an automated feeding machine for the workers so that they can get food stuffed into their face while they continue to work.
Yes.
And there's that kind of image of the machine as an authoritarian instrument of control. And then later on, like in the 70s, I think like 1979 or so, there's this movie called Looker. And in that society, at that point, the machine is not in the workplace, not in the point of production, but is being used to track the effects of advertising and by plastic surgeons in order to perfect the looks of models. So there's two different kinds of scanning processes. One in which a test audience is hooked up to machines, and their eyes are being tracked as to where they're looking on the screen to see what arouses them, what they're drawn to. And another one is being used to track down flaws in the supermodels' bodies and faces and for corrective surgery. And in that movie, by the way, all the supermodels are being murdered. So like this plastic surgeon is like on the case of tracking down the serial killer, murdering the supermodels.
Of course he is, and of course there are. But there is, wouldn't you say that now there's a third kind of machine, which is actually the machine that we've swallowed? Because previously it's machines that are third parties that are doing this to us, and we're the innocent victims. But now we've swallowed and absorbed all of those things. We have social media profiles. We put on our pictures. We might have dating profiles. We say who we are. We have, as they say, it's not surveillance, it's surveillance. We take pictures of ourselves and tag ourselves all the time. And also that makes us behave appropriately. We've swallowed the governance. We know what looks right. If we say something wrong, it's going to be bad. Maybe we won't be able to do X, Y, and Z. We've been taught and teach ourselves, and we do it to ourselves now, basically.
Yes, and it's that is absolutely true. Although even in the 1970s, these supermodels were voluntarily stepping forward to be perfected, but nonetheless, yes.
Yes, they were, but that's a slightly different thing. I mean, supermodels getting themselves voluntarily perfected. Anyway, this is a movie we're talking about, although I'm sure it happens in real life too. That's a slightly different thing, isn't it? That's a whole other topic about what that is, why that's happening. As we become more like objects, well, anyone, men, women, and I'm sure that men are much more beauty conscious than they ever were. I know that they are, trimming, male products. Everyone wants to look good on Instagram. Before, people didn't live their lives in that way. So it's not, we all are objectifying ourselves. We're all trying to present the most beautiful consumer product out of ourselves so that we'll be bought, right? We'll be bought by other people.
I want to look like Marilyn Monroe. That's my secret desire. I want to be as beautiful.
Well, and why do you want to be as beautiful as Marilyn Monroe? What would happen then if you were?
I don't know. Nothing, I guess, really. I would kill myself about 10, 15 years ago. But there's the fantasy, and then there's the reality. We all know the reality. It wasn't so good for Marilyn Monroe. I love having someone come along and clip that out instead of me just saying, I want to be like Marilyn Monroe. Well, out of context. And even in context, it's a weird thing to say. But
but it's a very honest thing to say, because if there's the fantasy that says if you were as beautiful as Marilyn Monroe, you wouldn't have to worry about your bills, would you? Some very handsome billionaire would be wining and dining you, taking care of you. And I think that this is part of some of the problem historically that some men have had with women. By not means all men. Most men are not like this, obviously, are lovely. But for some men, there is a resentment about women, which is, look at you, you are divorced of your personality and everything. Just by the fact of your body, you can have an easier time of it than I can, because I don't look as beautiful to the sex I want to attract as you do to me, because our nature has imbalanced us in that way. And so there's a fantasy, I think, for and as I said to you, it's great that you can admit that. Who wouldn't want to look like Marilyn Monroe if it all worked out the way that we think?
I don't want to be, I'm not saying I want to look as beautiful as she is as a woman. Like as a man, I want to be the equivalent. That's what I want to.
Okay, so we're changing things here as a man, but then women wouldn't go for you. It's not exactly the
Cary
same.
Grant, I guess, would be the male equivalent.
Yes, Cary Grant would, but then why? Is it because of his beautiful body? No, it's not. It's because he's so fun and debonair and does this and he does that, and because he's so playful.
Yeah, but Marilyn Monroe is also not simply so alluring because of her body.
Of course, she's also
or
very
even her
playful.
face. She's a type.
Yes, and furthermore, she knows. Sometimes what I think is men don't want women to know that the power that women have over them, but yet they despise women who don't know about that power. Do you see what I mean? Do you understand what I mean there?
Yep. Yes, but But let's step back again. You know, we're treading into the parrot room conversation. This is you can't have all the fun stuff in this public arena. We have.
I'm so sorry, but all this is fun stuff. All of this is fun stuff? You know, the thing about it is all of this is fun stuff, but it's not stuff that is normally allowed to be talked about because it's not serious stuff, or it's about silly stuff, or it goes on the border of taboo stuff that even though we think there are no taboos, there still are taboos. Anyway, whatever. Sorry.
Right. Okay. No, this is this.
Okay, so tell me some boring stuff.
Okay. No, this isn't boring, but I do wrestle with how to balance the personal, the immediate, the sensuous, the aesthetic, the playful part of my own creative drive, say, with my desire to be rigorous, to know something that's relatively true, to avoid playing into assumptions in society, and that which turns me towards what a lot of people perceive, I think, to be academic, kind of an academic orientation. I don't think it really is, but so it is tricky for me to figure out how to balance out the immediate, the sensual, the aesthetic, the playful, the fun, the humorous, with being relatively, I guess, serious and level-headed and just and rigorous and complete.
Why can't you have both? Another thing that Baudrillard talks about, and is interesting, is that all these things align also with scientific revolutions of the 19th century and 20th century, specifically quantum physics, stuff that shows us that nothing is as simple as we think, and there are no certainties. And he uses often the metaphor of how quantum physics and Newtonian physics just don't add up. And when in quantum physics you look at a particle, it becomes a wave, and nothing is solid. And he says that scientists have accepted this. That is what our world is. Nothing is solid. But the taboo is scientists accept it up to the point, he says, that they go and have a look into their microscopes. There, if you look in the microscopic world, fine, nothing makes sense, but we still have to pretend that everything does. So when you say to me, you find it hard to balance, what I say to you is, but both things exist. The difficulty is trying to say all that stuff is of a secondary nature, and only this stuff that is about logical, rigorous academic stuff, that's the important stuff. And I would say that for me, that's not true. Both things exist at the same time. There's sometimes this and there's sometimes that. And the desire to have one system, one theoretical academic system, is a doomed project. That's just what I think.
Well, okay. Here's why I feel like it's difficult to balance it out, because there's a difference in attitude and approach between what is entertaining, say, and what is educational. What's entertaining tends to operate on the level of the audience's shared cultural assumptions. What's entertaining isn't primarily aimed at revealing something underneath the level of appearance, but delighting in associations on the level of appearance.
Yes.
And so
can be easier to do.
Can I give you an example? Like yesterday, I talked to a Trump supporter, my one Trump supporting regular podcast guest, Stephen.
Yes.
Yeah, and he and I were talking about, we're trying to find shared ground, and it was an interesting conversation. It was playful, but I was trying to lead him to be a little more rigorous in his thinking, and he was trying to, explain to me what the truth was as well. But towards the end, we're talking about conspiracy theories and something called Project Bluebeam, and the idea, like he suggested that the rather than allow the Republicans to win in the midterms, the Democrats would start a nuclear war. Okay. And that, for him, and from a certain point of view for me, was an entertaining idea.
Okay.
It played to our presuppositions, our shared dislike of the Democrats, say, this notion of there being an instantiated other that would be in charge secretly, and that's running things. The feeling that We all have that the system that we're living within is a system that's leading us towards death and destruction, and it's out of control. And so it was an entertaining idea. It was
a pataphysical idea. Pataphysics is a word I've learned from reading Baudrillard. It comes from, it's a word termed by Alfred Jarry, who was a French 19th century writer. He wrote a play called Au Bourgeois, which you might know of, violent, surrealistic play. In that, his character Au Bourgeois studies pataphysics, which is the science of imaginary solutions. And Baudrillard, someone I interviewed for someone I dated for the show, Laurent de Suté, who is a Belgian academic, he was talking a lot about this, and we had an interesting discussion that Baudrillard was very taken with this idea. He became the member of a Society of Pataphysics. And what that is you are allowed to say stuff. You're allowed to say stuff that is, as you were describing, somewhat dangerous, because it's not just about entertainment. It's about entertainment mixed with theory. And usually when we look at theory and academic things, what we're used to doing is seeing things that we actually believe are true and can be proven, and we can go down through the steps of it. And he gives the permission to just make up stuff that, why don't you just test it out? There's danger in that, because especially as you spread those ideas around the internet, the subtlety and the context of them is gone. And then you just sound like you're saying crazy stuff. And there is enough crazy stuff, and it is very damaging. And in a certain way, what Trump is, it seems to me, is a meta pataphysician. He is a kind of au bourgeois. He is someone who's just playing with all these notions and playing with them politically. He's an entertainer, and he has a great skill for entertainment. And he's taking stuff and making it sound ritzy, as it were. And that is very dangerous, because it sounds very appealing, because it's often very shocking ideas that we might have played around with at the back of our mind, that are given some coherence, that are done as showbiz, and then it can make them feel real to us. And that is very dangerous. Nevertheless, it's of great value to play with ideas, and not always to say, I'm going to have to do this so I can only talk about things that I know are provable, because then you would never talk about anything at all. And there is a tremendous amount of conformity in the public debate these days on all sides. I think there's only a set lot of things that you're allowed to think. And I say that as someone who often thinks very silly things, and I often get a lot of pushback from people because of it. But and I find that more and more, because I feel just like it's my natural thing. I'm quite perverse. I'm quite playful myself. And I like just hypothesizing about things. I like talking about stuff, and that gets people's backs up. You can be like this, or you can be like that. The gray area, it seems to me, which used to be larger, gets smaller and smaller every day.
Well, I'm not against the idea of people having the freedom to speculate and to use their imaginations and come up with creative solutions or descriptions or explanations for things. But the difficulty with the ones that are the most entertaining is that we tend to have maybe a libidinal investment in them. They speak. What makes them entertaining is the way in which they gratify certain needs that we have. So maybe psychologically, we have maybe a narcissistic enjoyment of them, and they confirm us in ourselves. That's what we. I mean, that's not the only kind of entertainment there is, right? I mean, the difference between entertainment and art might be that this difference between what confirms what you already believe and confirms you in yourself as you are, as opposed to something that opens up questions and opens up the world and forces you to confront aspects of yourself and your life that you mostly want to avoid, perhaps. But the difficulty with something like pataphysics or Trumpian ideas is it plays with what traditionally was done in the realm of art, the realm of fiction, and it should be said, I write novels, you write novels, and that there is something interesting to be discussed about fiction and what this all is. But those ideas of your Trumpian supporter play out what used to be done in fiction, and it's presented as stuff that's actually happening, even though it may not be happening in the way that we think of. And I think there's a real dwindle in fiction, apart from a very set amount of Marvel style movies that we all know about. But it used to be that what you would do in art, in fiction, was to make something that's palpably unreal but has a ring of truth about it. And that is what art is. And that's something that Baudrillard says. And what he says is what we're usually confronted these days is something that is true, but that rings false. So art is making something falser than false, making something that's obviously extreme, like Au Bourgeois, a ridiculous, larger-than-life character, to make something that isn't presenting itself as things are the way that they are, so that you can then, through the action,
through the correctly created piece of art, you can take away something that gives you a glimmer about the real world. But this all plays out for us now in the real world because there are less, fiction isn't popular these days. We're so immersed in what comes out through our screens that we call reality, even if that's snippets from social media or chats like this or people's Instagram feeds or the whole world that we're drawn into online. The idea of stepping back from that and reading a novel or really engaging in a piece of art that is doing something else, that's setting up with a separate universe. It's kind of, we don't like doing that anymore.
Yeah, that's true. Bracketing out the question of aesthetics, not because I want to put it in the parrot room, but just because I want to hold on to this question of how you approach theory. Mm-hmm. And what I tend to aim at when I try to understand theory and then relate it to audiences they meet through a video or an interview, or once I wrote a book called Pick Your Battle, which tried to have a theoretical aspect to it, is I tried to create the effect or the affect of inquiry as its own kind of entertainment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The effect, the affect of not knowing as something that can be confirming, narcissistically enjoyed, and
it's just analyzing all the aspects of it as you're doing, not just analyzing the thing itself, but analyzing your approach also, and doing the thing that is difficult, which is being vulnerable and saying, I might be wrong here, and I also might be bringing a lot of my unchallenged assumptions to the.
But that's the other thing is that the boring approach is the more vulnerable approach. The boring approach is not the more authoritarian approach. The more authoritarian approach is the entertaining, sensual approach because it's already like.
Okay, but exactly. So have both. Do the entertaining and then question all the entertaining. That's what we all want to see. We all want to be razzle-dazzled, and then we want to feel suspicious of what we were razzle-dazzled about, and we want to have the backstage parrot room where the razzle-dazzle is unpicked and we can analyze it and go away feeling, okay, good, I didn't commit to that. I'm able now. Because it has to also be said, doing the analysis, doing the theory is also a way of washing our hands of that thing. All of us have the experience of being very emotionally out of nowhere, engaged. Suddenly something happens. Maybe we meet somebody, and then we'll do the good healing work of going back afterwards to say, you know what, they weren't that good. I can unpick it this way and be safe again. Right?
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, that's that's definitely when you put that.
Sorry, that's for the parrot room?
Well, maybe I was gonna say, well, we talk about like how to assess the ends of romantic relationships. I think that is the idea that you go back and you pick apart the person as not meeting your real needs and ambitions and goals, and they're not measuring up as a person after all. I think that's all very suspect that you don't do that because obviously, whatever you're going to point to as the weakness in them, the problems they have, the things you didn't understand were probably also the very things that you were seeking when you approached them.
Yes. And also maybe they were selfish and wrong things in your initial approach. Maybe what you were looking for from someone was how they were going to help you. And maybe that's not what it is really about. Maybe if you're looking at someone always as something you're going to buy to improve your life, not literally buy, sometimes literally buy, but not someone you're going to acquire to improve your life. Maybe that's not what it's about. Maybe that's what one of the big problems is. That's certainly what I feel. And you were asking me right at the beginning, what is this project that I'm working on? That's certainly something that I've come to feel over time, that we look at people as, how are they going, you meet how are they going to fit in my life? How are they going to improve my life? Are they going to get me? Is it going to be this, that? Maybe it's got nothing to do with that. Maybe it's a much more a much less capitalistic thing, which is just, I'll go and park myself and my personality and my needs and desires in this so-called world, in this consensual hyperreality that is society, that's always been society. And maybe I'll just follow that, not thinking selfishly how it's going to improve my life, but just to see what the experience with something that is not me, outside of myself, could bring me. But that's a very scary thing. Right.
Well, I want to walk through that again to be the idea there, it sounds like, is that you, in a relationship, a romantic relationship, that it's worthwhile to consider turning being of service to your partner rather than trying to be having them be of service to you.
Yes, absolutely. So again, what he's saying is, instead of always thinking about yourself, instead of always thinking inside your head, so for example, he's not a big fan of psychotherapy, because he says that, again, it's just about you, as it were, inside your fortress, solo, trying to solve yourself. And how can we solve ourselves? We don't even really exist. And in fact, most of us are more or less similar to other people. The desire to tell your unique story, to really get down to all the X, Y, and Z, it's useful. You should do it to a certain extent. But afterwards, you have to understand it's never going to give you, true connection, true pleasure. True connection, true pleasure, he says, always comes from things outside yourself. He says, being in a desert, you have an amazing feeling. Meeting someone and just experiencing, getting out of yourself, hearing who they are, having an interest in them, having an altruistic interest in them. He suggests that that's where more momentary, fragmentary, but bigger dividends come, rather than looking for someone like, well, are they going to fit into my life? Is it going to do this? How is it going to be when we're... However, there is a massive question of, therefore, how do you live your life? How do you live your life with somebody? It is possibly not for everybody, but it can be less lonely and more fun to live with somebody. But if you're not, what you just said, I think is the ideal and true. If you could live altruistically for somebody else, in all their flaws, understanding that they're never going to meet your criteria, but basically it's not exactly that they're the best, settle for this, but to have something that is beyond words and beyond social categorization, and then accept that it's not going to work out properly between the pair of you, but you're just going to respect this space and do this thing ceremonially for each other. He talks about ceremony, making up arbitrary rules. No, you don't fulfill me in all the ways that I had on my checklist. However, ceremonially, I'm going to just act as if you did, and I'm going to support you in some of your crazy notions, because more or less there's a connection between us that we don't need to define according to how the machine defines it, that we can do this, and we can do this almost in spite of and as an FU to everything else. And that's what our secret pact is. So that seems to me pretty romantic.
I'm going to be trying to be entertaining and speculative and use my imagination here towards the end of this first round of conversation, and bring up something that I had a conversation with my girlfriend about two scenes from movies, and I was trying to point out how weirdly similar they were, and she didn't at first see them as similar, but and through that conversation, I realized that they did have completely opposed visions, despite the fact that there was something similar about them. And it was the ending of the movie Grease. You've seen the movie Grease, right? At the end of the movie Grease, they do this dance number, John Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. It's all about how she says, "Yeah, you can do me. I'm ready. You better be good." But she dresses up all provocatively, and she's a bad girl now. And then at the end, they get into Grease Lightning, this car, and fly, like the car flies away into the air. And their senior year is over. They're going off into adulthood, and it's this moment of like, she has said yes to him, but at the same time, he has submitted to what she wanted because he's become a jock instead of a greaser. And so now they can go off into the future, get married, have that family. They're going to be fine, right? And they're flying away, and they've transcended the situation they were in, which was high school students, and they're becoming adults. It's this coming of age moment at the end of the movie. And then, but there's this mystical transcendence of the flying off in the car. And then at the end of the movie Repo Man, the car is like glowing with radiation, and the plot of the movie is coming together, and the Emilio Estevez character gets into the car with the janitor from the repo shop, and they drive off together, and they fly all over the city in this, and they transcend all their circumstances. And I said, so it's all I saw at first was like, okay, there's this moment of transcendence. It's the same moment. It's a flying car at the end of each movie. And she pointed out to me, she said, yeah, but at the end of Repo Man, the girlfriend runs up and says, well, what about our relationship? And he says, fuck our relationship. And they fly, and he flies off into the air with his
janitor. Yeah.
With his bro. But they're not even bros in the movie. They're with this really oddball, mystical kind of character.
Okay, I haven't seen Repo Man,
right.
But that is actually
the thing that he says. This guy's the guy who would turn to you on a break and say, "Have you ever have that experience where you're thinking about shrimp, and then somebody walks by and they say shrimp or a plate of shrimp, or they talk about shrimp." Like, just and you're thinking about it, and he says it's weird, isn't it? And that's all things like that throughout the movie. He also says at one point, John Wayne was a fag. But anyhow, the point is,
but I think that's a really good place for us to, if we're coming to the end of this section, to break, because the thing about it is, yes, ideally, and what I was saying before, we all want the John Travolta, Olivia Newton-John, which is like, in fact, it's almost like the end of Taming of the Shrew, which is a very, for me, interesting story, obviously with many problematic elements. But what it seems to me to be about, and that's the same there, is let's just step back and accept that we're not going to do things because they're right, but we're going to play a game. This is what society wants. I'll dress up for you in the way that you want for your fantasy, and you'll dress up as me in the way that I want for my fantasy. And that is the ideal thing. But there's a big spanner in that works, which is that men are very scared of women. Sorry, I should have turned off my email notifications. That's all well and good, but to do that, there's a lot of other issues that we haven't talked about yet in this conversation, and that are very interesting, and we can say for your parrot room, which are reasons why that might not be as simple, and it might be easier to say, fuck our relationship, let me just go off with one of my own kind and soar above the city and not have to stay a child, stay in a kind of toddler, adolescent friendship with my bro, so that I don't have to get in the car with you, because I might not trust you in a million years, and you might not be at all, and you might be getting dressed up for me because you want to play me, not because you're doing it in this very altruistic other space, but because you want my money, because you want a place in society where you're sitting next to me. And you in your Olivia Newton-John outfit, you look good, and I could go for that in a big way, but now I'm really scared. And the film, I tell you, the film tells me.
I'll just say, like, all the stuff you're saying, my psychoanalyst girlfriend pointed similar things out to me. It's like, Doug, how can you say these are the same? And which one do you prefer? You need to choose. And so anyway, we'll end it there.
The film that explains everything to me is Vertigo, which tells me so much about what I know about. Just plays out in the most amazing, talking of art, in a way that transcends any theory that I could read about this, or really any on-the-nose discussion that we might have about it, because it just splinters into so many different directions. It has told me and informed me so much about this sort of thing, about male fear, what men, women want. And it's a massive topic, so I don't know, maybe we save that for your parrot room, we'll talk about it another time. But do you want to talk about Vertigo?
I want to talk about, we can talk about Vertigo in this parrot room, Patreon room. We can talk about why men are afraid of women. And I will, my concerns about Baudrillard and Marx, and if they come up, I'll try to minimize those interjections. Because
that's very polite of you. I don't mind. Not on my account, Doug. Always.
No, I know, not on your account, but so that we can give people a kind of a taste of what your show will be like.
I feel you asked me, the first question you asked me is what is the show and what am I doing? I don't think we've talked about it at all, but maybe we'll talk about it in Parrot, or maybe we'll just carry on talking about all this stuff, which is so interesting.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please do consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons help to make sure that Sublation Media can continue to provide interviews, videos, books, and articles that are critical of the left from the left. If you are tired of remaining stuck within bourgeois ideologies and politics, help us sublate them both.